This afternoon's job is to work my way through all this box of fixtures and fittings. They all contain nuts and bolts, each labelled up with where it goes, and each one of these bags has to be gone through, and the bolts cleaned up on my pillar drill with this brand new steel wire wheel that's on here. I do have a wire wheel, proper grinder wire wheel, but it's a bit snatchy and runs a bit quick, and for small fiddly nuts and bolts I'd like to run at a slightly slower speed with less chance of it being flung halfway across the garden. Right, one bag down, 200 to go. Okay, so here's a suitable example of what I'm doing. All the nuts, bolts, washers have to go for zinc coating, make them nice and bright and shiny, and obviously help them resist corrosion. So ultimately they're all going to end up in one bucket of mixed bits and pieces, because that's the way the industry works. They're not going to take individual stuff out of bags, plate them, put them back in for me. So everything ultimately ends up in a bucket of bits. So because, as I've mentioned before, I'm dyslexic and my memory is absolutely atrocious, I'm taking probably excessive notes on what goes in each bag. This is an example of where I've got obviously 6 bolts and I've got 12 washers, but I've made a note on there that they're plain washers as opposed to spring washers, because that doesn't even show up very clearly on a photograph, and also it's a quick reference when I look at it. The rule is there just for a guide, so that if I'm ever wondering what size bolt I've got, I can have a quick look at that, as it give me a rough reference as to the size I've got in that particular bag. Excessive, I know, because I've got a lot of stuff to do, but again, if I don't do this, I'm going to be in big trouble. And so it continues day after day. Actually, to be fair, this is only day 2, and I've only done the odd hour and a bit, but it is tedious. So the idea is, my first thought was to knock all the rust off with the wire wheel before sending stuff off for plating, but it's super boring. So the plan is to obviously remove the worst of the corrosion, dirt, mud, rust, bits and pieces using this, and then I'm going to use electrolysis to remove the rust, and then after that send it for plating. The electrolysis, whilst it is time consuming, I can just leave it to do its thing. I think what I meant to say was that I really want to get the crap out from the threads and into the corners to allow the electrolysis to do its thing. Another reason for doing it is there's paint on some of these parts where somebody has painted the frame in the past, so I'd like to clean those off before electrolysis too. Washer and bolt, and I believe this screw here holds this mechanism together. There should be a spring and a ball bearing in there. Okay, that does not want to come out. It's been troublesome. Let's see if this shifts it. I love this tool. Okay, so we got the screw out. That came out cleanly. Let's find out what happens here. Now, apparently there's a ball bearing in here. I've got to be really careful not to lose it, which is why I'm doing it over this magnetic tray. And there it is. Okay, running away from me. Okay, one ball. Okay, after a little rummaging, I think there might actually be a spring in here. There it is. One spring. It was so thick with grease that you couldn't see it. Just going to show you how to be a little bit careful with dismantling these bits and pieces, because there's always something you miss. Okay, that's the last of the bag stuff. This stuff's not for plating, and everything that is for plating, excluding a few more bits and bobs that just dismantled, are in this bucket here. See, there's quite a bit there for plating. Hopefully that'll come back nice, bright and shiny, and it'll look a hell of a lot better than the rusty crap that's there now. Anyway, the next job, aside from adding a few bits and pieces to this, is to experiment with electrolysis, see if we can remove some of the rust prior to plating, give the platers the cleanest possible job we can, hopefully get a bit longer out of them. Okay, apologies for the appalling light. About 2 hours ago I put some of the nuts and bolts that I've been cleaning onto an electrolysis cycle to see if we could remove some of the rust from them using this as opposed to phosphoric acid. This is terrible lighting, sorry, this is all by torchlight because the evenings are really closing in now. And I'm doing this out in the shed because of the hydrogen gas produced by electrolysis. But I can see a definite improvement in some of these nuts and bolts. Some of the springs are still looking a bit ganky, and I can see where I haven't got all the paint off some of the parts, which is interesting. But I am going to stick this back in and let it sit for another couple of hours and then come out and have another look at it and see how we're getting on. But as far as I can tell, excuse this tooth, these parts are certainly looking cleaner. The spring, as you can see, is still rusty, and there's still rust on the head of this. This light is terrible, I apologise. But like I say, it's been in a couple of hours and it usually takes quite a bit longer. So I'm going to stick it back in and leave it for another couple of hours and see what happens. Okay, so this is the box of bits that's to go off for plating. There's quite a lot of junk in there, and I'm really paranoid that something's going to get lost in the plating process. Apparently it does happen, but you know, if you want stuff to look nice and bright, you have to take the risk.